It's either a win-win or a lose-lose. There's no win-lose. There's no like, oh, somebody won this conversation or I won this argument.
I love bookkeeping.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for listening to the I Love Bookkeeping podcast. My name is Hannah Robinson.
And I'm Melissa Honan.
And thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we're going to be wrapping up our series on relationships in business, and we're going to talk about something that's very important but hard to do, and that is how to have hard conversations. Melissa, I feel like you and I touch on this in almost every single episode that we've talked about in this series.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, as an introvert, I find almost all conversations to be hard. So I've had a lot of practice on this, and I'm sure other people feel similar, but we're going to talk about those really hard conversations that people just don't want to have.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like this industry, especially the community that we have and the community that I've seen, I feel like it is a lot of introverts. And so I think this will be a really beneficial episode to those who are maybe a little more timid when it comes to having tough conversations, especially when it deals with your business. I would say the first biggest tip I can give to people is do not wait. If there is something that is weighing you down, if there's something on your shoulders, if there is something that needs to be said, it's better to have this conversation sooner than later. And I feel like that applies to everything, like business, relationships, friendships, like have the conversation as soon as you can so that your emotions don't like bubble up and you don't explode.
The kind of see it, say it type thing, right?
Yes.
Because there's going to be little things along the way that maybe they wouldn't be a big deal, but they end up snowballing. But, then when they snowball, you have to sit down and you have to have that hard conversation. But if you talk about them as they come up, it's just, nice constructive feedback on something along the way. When you wait, it actually makes the conversation harder to have.
I agree. And this is something that I've actually kind of had to learn the hard way because I think I had a bad habit of brushing things aside or ignoring things and not seeing it for what it was, so that when it kind of things tend to snowball and get worse to the point where there's no coming back.
I totally agree with that. And I feel like I would have a tendency to put it off because I wasn't exactly sure how to address it or what to say, or, should this be a meeting or an email type of a thing? And so I think almost a lack of confidence in being able to communicate effectively was part of the reason I would procrastinate it and in a turn make it actually worse.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I did the same thing. And so something that I've been working on it's kind of, if there's a hard conversation that I need to have, I prep in my head. And when I mean prep, I don't mean really a script. I think of what I need to accomplish in this conversation. Like what is the problem? What is like finding a solution should be the end goal of having a hard conversation, I think.
Exactly. I do something similar with like bullet points. Like what are the points that need to be made? And, what is the goal to that conversation for sure? And, I know as somebody with anxiety, I will think of every possible terrible outcome that will happen from this conversation. Thank you, brain, for preparing me for the worst possible thing to happen. It's unlikely. But, going into it with a positive assumption again, because any of these hard conversations you do at the end of the day, you're coming out of a place of the best interest for yourself, but of course, the person that you're having this hard conversation with. So if you keep that at the top of mind, it will be helpful for you to have bullet points of what you want to make sure that they take away from the conversation, and make sure that you do give them, a positive tone to it, right? It's not, you don't want to tear people down. And I think it's easy to, get carried away in a conversation with somebody, especially if they're not taking it negatively. But if you prepare ahead of time and just keep on script, essentially, even though it's not a full script, I think that that's a really helpful to just, I guess, manage your emotions?
I think when there's a tough conversation that needs to happen, you need to come into it with a mindset of, I am looking for a solution. I'm not looking for a confrontation. Not every tough conversation has to be a big blow up. It can be, this is hard, but we need to find a solution together. And something that stuck out to me that I heard, I think it was actually like a relationship therapist that said this. But I think it rings true for all tough conversations. Hard conversations / arguments, it's either a win-win or a lose-lose. There's never a win-lose. Like it's either both parties have come to an agreement or come to a solution, or both parties are not there.
Yes.
It's like, it's either a win-win or a lose-lose. There's no win-lose. There's no like, oh, somebody won this conversation or I won this argument. It's either we found the solution or we did not find the solution. And I think part of that is managing your emotions and not dragging your personal feelings into it. That's so hard.
I think that is such an important point. And this is something that I worked on with my business coach, Jen Brown. Everyone's heard me sing her praises so many times, but this has always been really hard for me because I am very emotional. A lot of people don't think that because of the way that I present myself and my resting bitch face, but I'm really sensitive and I'm intuitive. So I definitely pick up on other people's vibes and feelings, and it affects me really easily and it'll throw me off, even virtually. And so, it kind of goes back to that idea that you can't control how other people respond. You can only control how you respond. And so, if you are in a hard conversation and, they blow up the conversation, it's really important that you compose yourself and, if necessary, pause the conversation. It's perfectly fine to end a conversation prematurely and say that you'll pick it back up at a later date when they can compose themselves. Because if either one of you go off course, then it's just like what you said, Hannah, you're not going to be able to win-win, right? And you don't want them to pull you down to their level and let it get out of control. So if you feel like you can't, one of you isn't managing your emotions, it's perfectly fine to stop and say, hey, this isn't going to be a productive conversation right now. I think that we're letting our emotions get the best of us. I suggest that we take a quick 5 or 10 minute break and then come back and see if we can continue this conversation.
I completely agree. I think it's better to step away when nothing is going to be accomplished. And I think, and that is a problem that I have had to learn. Like, there's a difference between having a hard conversation and looking for a solution versus trying to convince someone to be on your side. And that is one of those win-lose conversations that I just explained. Like, if one person is trying to convince you, or if you are trying to convince somebody else to see your side, you're not really working towards a solution. You're just trying to control somebody.
I agree. And I think like a good example of what this could look like is, say you're having a meeting with an employee because of a quality issue. And if the conversation derails from, I found this quality issue, we need to come up with a solution to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And it evolves into, an argument about whether there actually is a quality conversation, and it turns into more of an emotional issue where they maybe put it back on you and say, no, it's not my quality issue. It's your fault because you don't know how to manage people, right? Like that would be like a very common thing to happen in a workplace. You bring an issue to an employee and they put it back on the manager. Whatever they do, they deflect. And those are the types of things that you really have to not take personally and just see from their perspective that they're feeling attacked. And so there's a lot of things that you can do proactively to make sure that you minimize that. We can talk about that a little bit more in a little bit later. But in the moment, the best thing to do is to just bring them back to the facts and just say, I understand how you feel. This is a really hard conversation to have. I think that we need to talk about the actual quality issue right now. And if you have any feedback on other things, we can definitely talk about those at a later date. So every time they try to deflect the conversation from what you're trying to talk about, just bring it back and say, I totally understand that that's an item that you'd like to discuss. This meeting is about this particular issue at hand. We can definitely schedule a time to talk about the other concerns that you have.
Right. Well, and I think you did, that's something so important, especially if you are somebody's boss or if you're talking to somebody that's an employee of yours, seeing it from their perspective and trying to understand how they feel, I think it's so important because, and I think something that is really important to do when you're having a conversation is to really emphasize and reiterate if you have to, I am looking for a solution for both of us. Like this is not an attack. We are seeking a solution together.
We're a team because, we're a team together and this issue affects both of us. And I'm here to help you so that we don't have to have these hard conversations and we can have a solution together.
Right. Yeah. I think that's something that I think that really needs to be reiterated. When you're having these tough conversations, because it's like, that's it. If you come at it from an angle or from a place of, hey, we need to talk. We need to have a tough talk. People immediately get defensive. If I hear somebody say, we need to have a talk, my mind, oh my gosh, I'm ready to have a heart attack.
Today's show is brought to you by Keeper, the one app to run your bookkeeping business. Keeper helps you get faster client responses with your own custom branded QuickBooks integrated client portal. Finally, you can say goodbye to those pesky spreadsheets full of uncategorized transactions. Keeper also helps you catch those embarrassing coding errors before your clients do. And with Keeper, you can generate beautiful custom reports that your clients will absolutely love to read. To find out more, go to keeper.app. That's keeper.app. Mention I Love Bookkeeping to get 20% off your first 3 months. Again, go to keeper.app to find out more. Thank you for listening.
Anytime, even to this day, if an employee, which I have such an open door policy, it's ridiculous, right? But employees that I talk to regularly, if they just Slack message me and they're like, hey, can we have a meeting real quick? I panic. They'll be like, hey, when's a good time to meet? And I'll be like, right now, because my anxiety can't handle it. Okay.
Right now, because I can't take it.
I can't. Are you quitting? What's happening? My mind just goes from 0 to 100 so fast.
Yeah. Yeah. But you have to remember that everybody else pretty much does too.
Exactly. And so thinking about that, and I think that's part of how to minimize, the anxiety or minimize that it's not, make sure that they don't feel like they're being attacked. You can do that proactively. And I think that a big part, if it's an in-person meeting, making sure that you're sitting down, right? It's very common that, any hard conversation should be sitting so that people are typically more comfortable, less defensive. In a virtual environment, it has to be on Zoom. You have to have your camera on. It needs to be face to face. And you need to make sure that, they are given the time to express any concerns that they have about the conversation, but also ask questions. I think the biggest thing here is that a lot of times it comes off as an attack because you're doing all of the talking. For me, I don't want to talk at them. If there's an issue, I want, like you said, to have a solution. And so I want to know their thoughts. I want to say, hey, I identified that this is a problem. Is this something that you've noticed? What are your thoughts on, do you think that this is a concern? If you think that this is a concern, what can we do to solve it? If you don't think it's a concern, why? It needs to be a two-sided conversation, not you saying, hey, this is a problem. This is exactly how you have to solve it. It really needs to involve them because you need their buy-in. And that's the only way that you're going to get that win-win is if they do have a buy-in, because if they don't care or if they're not a factor in the solution, then there's no way that you're going to win. It's going to be a lose-lose.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think approach is everything. And I think the way that your tone of voice is, it's little things. It's your approach, it's your tone of voice, and it's making it clear that you're not sitting in the principal's office. You're not being called to detention. It's a discussion of finding a solution. And I think just changing your mindset to that, instead of this mindset of like, oh, I have to have this tough conversation. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be terrible. Yeah, it might be a little awkward at first. And it's always hard talking about something that's, sensitive subjects, like if quality control or things of that nature. It's always hard, but you don't have to make it harder on yourself and for the other person by approaching it with like this being called to the principal's office tone.
Yeah, I think like honestly that every leader needs to have regular check-ins with their team. And those regular check-ins, whether it be weekly or bi-weekly, typically, unless it's an emergency, that is frequent enough to discuss in your regular meetings. If it's an emergency, if it's a huge thing and you do have to say, hey, we need a quick meeting, it needs to be ahead of our time. So yeah, there's no way around that. But most concerns we're talking about could be done during your regular check-in. So that way they don't snowball into having to be that principal's office, like one-off meeting where it's going to be an issue, right? Like, if again, because you don't want to wait, it should be these small things that can just happen as part of a regular conversation and you don't have to make it its own thing that's big and scary, separate from your regular check-in. And if you're not having regular check-ins with your team members, even as the big boss, right? Then you need to consider that. I think it's extremely important for even as a CEO, you're not in the day-to-day. Maybe you're not doing bookkeeping anymore. Maybe you have an operations manager. Maybe you have an account manager, whatever your organizational structure is. As the owner, as the CEO of the company, you still need to be accessible to maintain your company culture and also to instill confidence in the team that you still care about them. So those regular check-ins or at least office hours where you are available are going to be extremely important in this.
And something that I really kind of had to learn when I was younger and entering the workforce is not letting things like I think especially when you're younger, you tend to be a little more hot-headed and take everything personally. It's not always personal. In fact, a lot of the times it's not personal. And I think by not taking things personally and also really actively working on your listening skills, I think that can really change your perspective with having hard conversations, because then you can look at it as like, okay, this is a hard subject. It doesn't have to be a hard conversation because I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to see it from the other person's perspective and I'm willing to come to a solution. I think I know for myself when I was younger, I would come into conversations like already hot-headed, like already ready for the fight, because that's what I thought it was going to be. When a lot of the times it doesn't even have to be that way. It can just be, hard subject matter, but it doesn't have to be this ugly, hot-headed confrontation. And I think that's something that a lot of people can really gain some perspective on if they come into the conversation with a willingness to listen, a willingness to have somebody else's perspective, and like having a goal of working towards a solution.
That is so true. I think a lot of people have a tendency to think about how they're going to respond to something rather than actively listening to the other person. And that's a big part of this, is that it's okay if you don't have the perfect response. You need to actively be listening to the other person. And if you need time to process that, you can ask for it. You can always say, hey, let me think on that just a minute. But instead of thinking, okay, well, what am I going to say next? really actually listen to them. And, I think we've talked about this so many times on the podcast, Hannah, but literally everybody just wants to be listened to. So if you do that, that's going to be, the best possible thing for you and for your company. And also coming up again with a solution for whatever it is that you're going to be talking about.
I think wanting a solution, instead of a confrontation is kind of the overall end goal of this type of conversation. And I think listening to somebody and really having some empathy, I think that's huge. And it sounds simple, but just having empathy for what somebody else could be feeling, that really changes the whole perspective of the conversation.
It is just honestly one of the most important things that you can do as a leader is to just have empathy. And if it does not come naturally to you, that does not mean that you're like out of luck here. There are definitely, like tools and techniques that you can learn and work on, to identify how other people are feeling and how you should respond to that appropriately. It just comes down to practice and caring enough to work on it, right? So essentially having empathy to realize that you need to work on your empathy, which sounds like empathy inception, but it really is. It's honestly the most important thing as a leader to have empathy, and really act on it.
I think the phrase, people always say like, imagine how somebody else feels. I think when you're able to do that, having hard conversations actually becomes a lot easier.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah. Do you have kind of an example in your head that pops up in your mind when you think about having hard conversations that you'd be willing to share?
Oh my gosh, I cannot share them right now. I'm still,
oh my God. Okay.
Because circling back to what you said, like, I still, no matter how much practice that I have, guys, an amazing communication consultant and business coach that helps me work through these things, I do still take everything personally. And I mean, I share, a lot on this podcast and in some of the social media and the Bookkeeper launch, community, but there's still a lot, that I'm dealing with the aftermath of right now, where I'm just not emotionally ready to share a lot of that. There's been a lot of it in the past year, especially. And I just have to say that no matter how much I work on it, the work is never done. And so I find it really helpful to have somebody to role play those hard conversations ahead of time. And I do it every single time, guys, because I learn something new every time. And so if it's something that you struggle with, I would highly recommend finding, a mentor, a colleague, your husband, your toddler, whatever you need to do to just role play it out, and think about how you would respond to things. And that's been really helpful for me.
I guess when I think of this, something that pops out in my head is just in personal relationships. I feel like working on communicating things as they come instead of waiting for my emotions to bubble up and I like erupt like a volcano. That's what I've been working on. I'll share this. That is what I have been personally working on myself is communicating things as they come and communicating them in a less of an emotional manner and more with the end goal of finding a solution instead of just being emotional and erupting. So that is what I have been personally working on.
That's a great skill to be working on. I have to do that as well in an insight into my marriage that nobody needs, but I am the same way, Hannah. And so if I ever have an issue with my husband, I will actually send him an email instead of going to talk to him about it, because I'm not there where I can control myself from going from like 0 to 100 when something bothers me. So I list it out in a nicely worded email. I'm going to work on maybe presenting him with like a slide deck. I'll take pictures.
PowerPoint scraps.
Presentation. Yeah, I made a scrapbook of all of the beard trimmings that you left in the sink. Whatever those things are.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Well, if you guys have some ways that you like to have hard conversations, or if you have tips for us, anything you want to share, please shoot us an email at success@ilovebookkeeping.com. Again, that's success@ilovebookkeeping.com. My name is Hannah Robinson.
And I'm Melissa Honan.
And thank you for tuning in to the I Love Bookkeeping podcast.
I love bookkeeping. Here's a little shout to all my friends working hard at keeping the books. You want to change your life, you want to grow that